You're listening to Rebel Hearts Rising, where we believe your darkest hour holds the key to awakening depth and profound inner wisdom. I'm Tam Burke, and I created this to remind you that when your heart wants to shut down, that's your call to rise, like a phoenix from the ashes. What makes this unique is that every episode is paired with a guided meditation to help awaken your intuition and heal on deeper layers. Together, we'll turn pain into power. What's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Rebel Hearts Rising. Today, I'm going to tell you the story about something that I did a few weeks ago that I genuinely thought in a million years I might never do, and yet I did, and I'm actually really proud of myself for doing it. I also want to thank you for your patience. The last 2 weeks, we did not have a podcast episode. Your girl was coming back from a trip, and I got sick, and life's. And what's really cool is the old version of me would have rushed to make something, to put something up, just to get something out to honor my commitments. But I've also learned a lot about honoring the commitment to myself and what I need, and also not taking life so seriously. One of the really beautiful and messed up parts of having an extreme loss in your life is that you start to realize that things just don't matter that much. Are we going to realize in 1 month, 1 year, or 10 years that I missed 2 weeks of podcast episodes? Nope. And so we just get to move on. So thanks for your patience, and I encourage you to invite more of that will it matter in a month or a year from now energy into your life and watch how things change. If you're new here, please like and subscribe so that you know when new episodes are released, which should be weekly on Thursdays. Okay, let's jump in. I want to tell you guys about my trip to Colorado and the really unexpected thing that happened that kind of changed my whole energetic demeanor and has probably dropped like 100 pounds of energy that I didn't know that I was carrying. But before we dive into those details, I need to tell you a little bit of a backstory. And I've been hesitant on how to share this and if I even would share this, but it's a pretty relevant part of the story. Having been a studio owner, I always wondered what's the line between authentically sharing my truth with my community and kind of protecting what goes on behind the scenes. And I always felt like it was my job and my obligation to kind of keep the drama to myself and move on. And I think that served me really well, but at the point that I am now, it feels like sharing my story is even more important. So I'm going to dive into a few of the details around how my partner and I sold our business, and then kind of how we got kicked out of our business, and the personal drama that ensued after. So in July of 2024, we sold our business, and we had a contract signed that we would take a month off, and then we would come back as teachers and consultants. Y'all, we were like on cloud 9. Do you know how amazing it is to successfully scale and then exit your business? Like, we were so proud of ourselves. And also, after everything that we had been through in the last few years and the deep, deep grief that I was still really struggling with at the time, it was a really big deal for us to relieve that responsibility so that we could be part of the community and not the pieces that hold the community together. So we took our month off. We traveled to Hilton Head. We took a week in Idaho with the dogs. It was incredible. And we came back to Colorado. 2 days before I was supposed to teach my first class, I got an email that said, actually, we don't need you for this class anymore. And so I called the new owner to just say like, what's up? And like, hey, this could have been a phone call. In a 4-minute phone call, I'm not exaggerating, I looked because I remember thinking at the time like, whoa, that went by so quickly. Matt and I got fired as a pair. Like literally old school recess style where it's like, oh, this is one couple and actually, we're going to fire both of you. And then some things proceeded to go on where it was very clear that we weren't welcomed at the studio. And it was very clear that we were no longer going to have a relationship with the new studio owner. And something that really hurt our hearts was that we had poured 6 years of blood, sweat, and literal tears into the studio and growing it into what it was. And what hurt us so deeply is people are allowed to change their minds. We want people to always honor what feels best for them, but to move with integrity. We really wished that we would have gotten an opportunity to teach a class and say our goodbyes to the community that meant so much to us. And since we weren't afforded that, we decided to send an email to a select group of students who we were close with. And then that was also used as backlash against us for something we shouldn't have done. And whether we go into we shouldn't have or we should have, it was really important for Matt and I to be able to speak up and say like, hey, we didn't just get a bunch of money and leave, which is what a lot of students thought happened. And we wanted to tell people how much we loved them. Something that I regret is not hosting an event where we could have said goodbye to our team members, because shortly after that, we decided to pack up and move across the country back to Charlotte. And so can you imagine literally spending your entire life, like Matt and I had relationship issues because at one point we realized I was having an affair with Soul. Like I put Soul's needs above everything else, including myself and my partner in our life. And then to never go back and see the studio again, to never see some of the people on our team that we had worked with every day for years, to never even speak to people who were on our team. Like the amount of heartbreak that we had, it really shifted us into a negative frequency. And it really put me in a place where I felt so heartbroken and I felt so hurt that I didn't have the ability to rise from like princess energy into queen. And I regret some of those things. And I regret how much I let my emotions get a hold of me. But I was also at a really challenging point in my life with everything that I was moving through. And so when we came to Charlotte, we felt pretty beaten and our frequency was at an all-time low because our frequency is made up of the thoughts, the stories, and the beliefs that you have about yourself. And so instead of walking away from that experience being like, wow, we scaled a company to multi-millions and then successfully exited and this business still exists today, we walked away with how we felt we had been treated. And this happens all the time, right? We create false stories that don't serve us and we have these narratives that play out in our head, but we were just so heartbroken from the experience that it took us months to even be able to step back into a yoga studio. It took us a really long time to even want to practice yoga. We felt so heartbroken about everything that had happened. And so I knew that I was going to have this trip for Living Brave Live in Colorado, and then I was going to fly out there in early September 2025. And as it started to lead up to this trip, y'all, the anxiety that I had was through the roof. I was going to stay with some friends in Longmont and do some hikes and go to Red Rocks and live a Colorado highlight life. And I was nervous about who I might bump into. And I was nervous about seeing my old house because I loved that house, probably my favorite of all the houses I've lived in so far. And there was a lot of worry and a lot of heaviness and a lot of question in how I would feel going back to a place that we really felt like we got kicked out of and the emotions that would come up. And in one of my first days there, I went to the Whole Foods in Longmont and I remember thinking like, you know what, I'm just going to go to a different grocery store. Like, I don't want to run into anyone. And I remember thinking like, what the heck? Not wanting to run into people for what? And so I started to make different decisions. And that is a key piece that I want you to listen to because our frequency changes. The trajectory of our entire life gets to change when we choose differently. You can't quantum leap. You cannot grow if you continue to make the same decisions again and again. I've heard it like this, and this was really helpful to me. Our nervous systems will always choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. And the way that I see this intuitively, if you're a hiker, is when you're hiking and there's like very clearly grooved paths. They might even have like sandy bottoms. They might even be paved. And it's like, this is the path. We will always choose the path that is most obvious over other paths that might not be as grooved. And this representation also talks about the way that our neural pathways work. So when it comes to making a decision, it starts to become automatic. We'll actually always continue to choose the things that we've been choosing because it's more comfortable, it's easier. We don't have to have as much attention, which then provides us with intention on what we're choosing. And so it sounds really insignificant to talk about what grocery store you're going to, but that little change started to really change everything else on my trip. So we'll fast forward a couple days and I was at Red Rocks seeing Chris Lake with one of my girlfriends. Y'all, so fun to dance at Chris Lake at Red Rocks. Awesome show. Red Rocks is an incredible, incredible venue. If you have not been, I highly recommend it. And I don't know if it was the Rocky Mountain High from the sativa joint I had just bought at the dispensary, or being up in high elevation, or the amazing hike that I had been on earlier that morning with my friend. But my friend Autumn turns to me and says, "We should go to Rocket tomorrow at Soul 19. Gabby's teaching and it would be so fun to surprise her." And for some of you who don't know, I brought Rocket into the Boulder County scene and really developed a bunch of teachers there to continue this practice that I so love. Like, y'all, if you don't know, I named my dog Rocket, okay? Like, this goes really deep for me. Rocket is one of my greatest passions in life. And I remember thinking, like, I would never go back to Soul, especially with how things were left and how awkward things were and like all the heartbreak that I had around this. It's like breaking up with your partner of 6 years and never speaking to them again and then like going to get coffee with them. I just felt like I wasn't ready. And I don't know if it was the music and the dancing, which is what we scientifically know is something that actually changes our frequency. But I just remember thinking, hell yeah, I want to go do Rocket with a teacher who I trained, who is carrying the lineage in this place. Like, of course I want to go. And actually, of course I want to go to Soul 19. Like, why wouldn't, I called it my boyfriend, but it was also kind of like my baby. Why wouldn't I want to see how this community was doing that I spent so much of my life developing? And so the next morning I woke up and I decided, you know what, let's go. And so I had another friend join me there as well. And I walked in the doors and I expected it to be so strange. Even on my way there, I was like panting the last 5 minutes before I arrived. Like, I was so nervous to go there. And this is what we talk about, where it's really challenging to choose an unfamiliar hell, to make different decisions, to decide to choose differently. It would have been so much easier, because I was slightly hungover, to just say like, oh no, I'm going to hang on the couch and like I'm gonna save my energy for the conference that I have coming up this week. But I decided to choose differently. And because I decided to choose differently, things changed. And I want to pause and also talk about the practice that I had been doing that I think put me in the place to have this experience to begin with. Earlier in August, you guys have heard me talk about this, I was in like a little bit of my own mental rut, just really getting in my own way. Like, my life is incredible. I have so much time freedom. I have the best work in the entire world, like really helping people develop themselves into who they know that they are. I have an incredible partnership. And yet I was picking on all of those things. I was really in a negative mental spiral. My frequency was suffering. And I believe part of why my frequency was suffering is because I was still holding on to this story that didn't serve me about how I got kicked out of Colorado. I'm using air quotes, because that's absolutely not true. It was a choice. And I started to listen to high vibrational music, the heart chakra frequency. And then I was writing a gratitude list every day, as well as writing a love letter to myself. Y'all, writing a love letter to myself is one of the most profound things. And I also did it while I was listening to this music. So not only was I witnessing and viewing myself differently, but I quite literally had frequencies that were rewiring me on a different level. And I think that this completely changed how I saw my experience in Colorado, that this is actually what gave me the power to choose differently. Because it's so easy to say like, oh, choose differently. And it's like, well, what is the motivator behind that? What is the momentum that allows you to choose differently, to make different decisions, to make more empowered decisions for yourself? And by writing this love letter to myself, I like really got to see myself. I'm gonna cry. I like really got to see myself, and I really got to witness myself. And the way that I practiced writing this love letter was to write it like I would a teacher who I really respected. And so of course there were challenging moments, or I would write things that I knew other people had told me, but maybe that I didn't feel wholeheartedly. But through practice of doing it every day, and then the big kicker was I would meditate in that energy. So after I was done writing the love letter, I would read it to myself and meditate with this frequency music. Like, I know that at my core, this changed my frequency. And again, our frequency is made up our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, and all of those things create our actions. So when my friend Autumn asked me, do you want to go to Soul and practice? The girl who hadn't been writing love letters to herself, she would have said no because she didn't have the energy, the momentum. Literally, we know an object in motion stays in motion. Well, the same thing about positivity, right? If you keep feeding yourself positive energy, if you keep seeing yourself as the person that you know that you are, almost as if you're writing it into existence, that is how you get to show up. That's so crazy. So I get to Soul, and I'm like so nervous that it's going to feel weird, and how weird it's going to be to see like my old team members, like people that I worked with. And I walked in and it didn't feel weird at all. It actually felt so whole and beautiful. I walked in and it was like I put down bags that I didn't even know that I was carrying. I got into class, and your girl hasn't been practicing Rocket because between moving and face surgery and everything else, yoga hasn't been the most comfortable for my face. Turns out Rocket, super hard. Who knew? It's like a very challenging practice. And while we were practicing, I thought, how weird that this doesn't feel weird at all. How awesome that this feels whole. And then the most transformative moment happened. We were starting to cool down, and during class, people had been asking questions. Rocket is like very community oriented, where curiosity helps people grow. And there were all of these new people in the Rocket class. I had no idea who they were. And equally, they had no idea who I was. And that's actually when it hit me. I never really understood like what legacy was. And to be honest, I don't really care about legacy. But there was this moment where I realized that all of these people are practicing Rocket, and they have no idea who I am. And yet this practice is here because I brought it here. And that's something that nobody will ever be able to take away from me. That in no way that we got fired, or how things ended, or the heartbreak that we had from feeling like we got kicked out, nothing could take away from the fact that my love for something, for no other reason than because I loved it and because I wanted other people to experience this practice, was this impact left behind. And therefore, people's lives are being impacted just because I loved something. And as I'm feeling this and witnessing this in class, the teacher starts to close the class, and she sends a final blessing out for the people who came before us, who we don't know, but who set our paths in motion. And I turn and I see my friends crying. And you realize that so often we have false stories and things that we tell ourselves, and this especially happens when we're hurt, right? This especially happens when our heart breaks, when we don't understand what's happening, when we have a level of immaturity, and we hold on to something that isn't true. I think I have shared with you guys that this happened to me after Tina died too. The lesson, the false story that I took away from that was, if I love something too much, it will be taken from me. And this whole Soul 19 thing reaffirmed that, which I also had to then move through. But this is a powerful story because I want you to look at your life and look at where you have a false story that's happening. Where you have a piece that your brain incorrectly stored information. And I like this best in when we look at young children, because with young children, brains are not fully formed and they don't fully understand what's happening in the world. And an example I use a lot with my clients is, let's say that you're doing art as a kid and your mom's like, oh, come on, we don't have time for that. We need to get going. We're running late. Like, oh, stop doing art. And instead of being able to see the whole picture, like, oh, if we're running late to something, I need to prioritize moving closer to completing that task, putting my shoes on, getting my coat, etc. Our brain somehow stores art isn't important. And it's more important to do what you're supposed to be doing and be on time. And that's another example of a false story. And so I offer all of this to you today because there are false stories that we have that are holding us back, that keep a ton of baggage on our backs, in our hands, that we don't even know that we're holding. When in fact we could put it down by recognizing the truth. And do you know the way that you recognize the truth? Shifting your frequency. When you shift into higher frequency vibrations, you have an ability to really come home to yourself. And so this is why I'm so excited, because I'm going to offer a free 21-day transformational program called Sexy, Rich, and Wildly Fulfilled. And it is going to take all of the things that we just talked about and put it into a kick-ass transformational program. And there's going to be lots of prizes along the way, but the grand prize winner is going to win a trip on one of my retreats. This is like almost a $2,000 value. And so I'm really excited because by the time this drops, I'll probably be launching it within the next week or so. Y'all, if these are the changes it made in my life, on top of making the most money I've ever made in a sales period, making the most cash I've ever made in the sales period, feeling the sexiest I've ever felt, feeling the most confident in myself I've ever felt, feeling so confident that I got to choose differently. And this is what I want to offer to you. It's these small daily rituals of coming home to ourselves, of really understanding how our frequency impacts our entire reality. And how when we start to change our frequency, everything around us responds. Because one of my true core beliefs is that our inner world is projected onto our outer world. And so if there's something that's happening in your own life that doesn't feel good, it's because of what's happening within. And something that I've been learning from all the clients I've worked with over the last 5 years, those of us who grew up in critical households end up having a pretty hard self-inner critic. And those of us who grew up in households where the external was valued, like success, what ends up happening, especially as women, is that we chase the external resume. Y'all, so often in my life, I had a resume that looked incredible on paper, but I felt like shit inside. And so I have a mission for helping women build a life that feels as nourishing or even more nourishing than it looks on paper. And that's exactly what we're going to do in Sexy, Rich, and Wildly Fulfilled. And I really hope that you join us, because normally I charge like hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for a program like this. But with the way that it changed my life, I seriously can't not offer this to you guys. So I'm very, very excited. And as always, there's a guided meditation that will be paired with this. If you're on my email list, there are journal questions that get sent out to you so that you can really start to identify some of the key themes around what's going on with your frequency, around the false stories that you have. And as always, the thing that means the absolute most to me is if you share this with another woman. Because the whole reason I created Rebel Hearts Rising is because I want to create a community of such badass women that know that their life has the ability to change and shift when they do the inner work. When we believe that we're actually worthy of the life that we've been building the whole time. Thanks for being here, y'all. I really appreciate it.